of Society, Part 4, Session 7. We ended last week's session by outlining the approach that would be taken in an SVT economy, where a public-private partnership method was the preferred option for dispensing health services in any type of society, developed or developing. We can restate aspects of the approach as given last week. Why healthcare systems around the world are so challenging to administer because of affordability and rising costs upon the state is due to the factors of production, land, labor, and capital, not optimized and out of balance. If this was the case, labor would be fully employed with real purchasing power. Land values would not be so high to preclude its use for health facilities and the like. Capital would not be expensive and inflationary to cause health costs to be so high and rising over time. This is the missing element in the debate in the US, or for that matter, in any country that has a national insurance scheme, or in the developing world where the full cost of healthcare is taken on by the state. Like all other expenses to the individual and the family, healthcare costs are equally applicable, as are food, shelter. Most individuals and families would not object to this cost. Healthcare is a private matter that should not be subject to the intrusion of the state. If their ability to pay is greatly enhanced through an SVT rate, this would make citizens very happy, as they would now have some control over this important element in their lives as far as affordability is concerned. If all hands are fully and gainfully employed in a community, the pool of funding that would be created would be far more bountiful than if only a portion of the community is so endowed. A successful and healthy healthcare system depends on the adequate and appropriate funding of all its various aspects. And what better way to ensure that this, if all its contributors, taxpayers, can adequately contribute to this important endeavor? The main reason why national health insurance and social security insurance schemes all around the world are failing or are scheduled to collapse sometime in the future is because of the inability of contributors to adequately contribute and because of rising costs. The single payer system is the best system for any country that has started a recovery process, which is certainly the case for one that would have recently adopted site value taxation. The individual citizen would be in no position to afford any costly premiums in this first instance. As the economy grows and as personal wealth also grows, as will be the case under SVT, a co-pay system would now be applicable. Government can now offload some portion of the expense on the individual, whose ability to pay is now growing. This is also desirable because the citizen now has a greater vested interest in better healthcare system, and providers would be under greater scrutiny than under the single payer system. Pool of funding growing, the state would be in a better position to fund all those improvements that are demanded by the WHO. Such activities as the financing of research on local diseases, the improvements to the collection, analysis, and dissemination of all health-related data, and the ability to pay for and host those specialized medical procedures only now available in the first world countries would now be possible. Over time, the ability of the individual to pay the full premium of the insurance would materialize under SVT. The state would now free itself of this expense, but would still have the supervisory and auditing role to play in the healthcare industry. This role would be not now less important, as the management of all the elements of the healthcare require communication and decision making. In this final stage of health insurance of individuals, the state would finally free itself of the obligation to provide subsidy and financial support to the community's health expense, as the pool of funding created from individual contributions would fund all health costs. This then is a picture of how healthcare could be provided under an SVD regime. Before we conclude, are there any questions or comments about all of this? This then is the approach under an SVD economy of how health services would be dispensed. It is essentially a health insurance scheme where eventually the citizen's obligations to pay will increase commensurately with his ability to pay, because in the transformation to an SVT economy, this ability will increase, lessening over time the needs for the state to subsidize. What do we make of this approach, having had a week to consider it? We will now move on to the issue of social development in an SVT economy and how it would be substantially different from what obtains now, where the state must make substantial outlays to the citizens because of the obvious needs. The development ideals that social services should be dispensed to able bodied members of the community is a real indictment on that community. In the ideal situation, social services should only be reserved for those members who genuinely cannot fend for themselves because of injury, disability, infirmity, or old age. To have able bodied men and women lining up at the dole office because of lack of employment opportunities is a failure of the economic system, and not any failure of the individual as is commonly viewed. Under current economic arrangements in every country of the world, a significant number of able bodied persons are shut out of the economic landscape and are rendered poor or destitute as a result. Even for those who are fortunate enough to find work, often menial work, the economic condition only gives the wherewithal to acquire the most basic of amenities, and they often are deemed, though, a significant number of middle class members now rely heavily on state assistance for education, health, and housing, and this phenomenon is worldwide. Clearly, this is because of the factors of production are out of balance and not working for the benefit of humanity. As long as land values occupy preeminence over capital and labor, there will be the need for the state to fill the deficiency arising. Whether it can be, whether it can do this effectively is doubtful in most countries, so that it is incumbent on the state to ensure that every able-bodied member is gainfully employed with real purchasing power if it wants to spend minimally on social services. This is an ideal that seems to have escaped most nations of the world. It cannot be restated enough that holding lands of value out of use is macroeconomically and microeconomically deleterious to the state. Macroeconomically, the wealth of the country is reduced by the amount it could garner on those lands held out of use. Less wealth will then be available for distribution to its members. Microeconomically, there will be less business formation, less employment, and less taxes attainable. All government policies, or at least the main ones, should be essentially focused on optimizing the state's macro and microeconomics. Let's have a break now. can most efficiently and effectively be done by addressing the inactivity or near inactivity or uneconomic activity on lands of high value. The holders of such lands must be coerced into changing the situation by imposing a tax on the value of such land holdings. This should be the principal tax to be applied to any activity that will subsequently take place on these holdings. The holders will have the obligation to pay this tax to compensate for the opportunity lost by other community members of not having access to these sites. The impact of this scenario would have on the need for social intervention and services would be minimal, and whatever social services are proffered would be to meet the genuine cases adequately and completely. Social services in most developing countries are dispensed as if they are outing fires without any cogent plans to treat with the fundamental social issues. The first objective should be to have a qualified and competent social worker, to have qualified and competent social workers visit every single household in the community and report on his findings to a general database and recommend interventions if necessary. Objective should have the force of law behind it if it is to be effective. Visits should have the protection of the law behind them, with social workers having police officers accompany them. These visits should be at least biennial, and a great deal of knowledge of the social fabric of the community could be gained here. Social policy and strategy can then ensue, but in an SVT environment, the least intervention would be the order of the day, because citizens would have the best wherewithal to fend adequately for themselves. Those who cannot must be given the best service that the community can offer and must be regarded as equal members of the community. The global attitude of treating these members as inconvenient afterthoughts, only dispensing handouts, and not seeing to their true needs must end. Those requiring social service support can be listed as retirees, persons with disabilities, persons with permanent infirmities, mental health patients who cannot significantly contribute to society, orphans, geriatric homes, and any other persons who, for any reason, cannot contribute significantly to society. Retirees rightfully are entitled to their pensions, although there's great debate worldwide now as to what age this should become due. Whether these pensions should be full pay, co-pay, or single pay is another debate, except to say that in an SVT environment, the full pay model could be easily accommodated than with most other environments. Other categories of social service recipients. Not only must such persons be managed by the most professional caregiving personnel and systems, they must be housed in the best conditions with all the amenities for comfortable living. Nothing less would suffice. Gone would be the attitude and approach that any standard of care National Social Service Commission must be set up in each country, which all social service providers and organizations will report to, be audited by, and whose standards would be regularly reviewed to justify all state expenditure. This commission will also receive complaints from the recipients as well as the public and adjudicate on these complaints. They will have the force of law and penalize those who are in breach of the applicable laws. Need to have the appropriate numbers of persons adequately educated and trained in the various areas of social service delivery is vital for successful service delivery. This is key, and the state must expend the necessary resources to ensure that this is the case. Persons who are providing such services must be regularly audited and retrained to ensure that the best service is provided always, free of deviation and untoward events. In the same way that the proposed healthcare system was outlined above, the social services care system would also not be limited, or should not limit its providers and personnel to local entities. It would reach out to any global providers and offer contracts once they meet the stringent criteria that would be set. Contracts would be for 5-year periods with the option to continue for another 5 years. Contract conditions would be reviewed annually after the initial tender to ensure that both parties are satisfied. Providers and personnel would be required to remain au courant with the most up-to-date and effective treatments and techniques. And of all social service recipients represent treatment to our least fortunate and those least able to provide for themselves adequately. It is the most obvious show of a community's humanity and compassion. And if this is found to be wanting, then this just shows the level of civilization of the community and country. The developing world has faltered badly in this regard, and the developed world have only fared a little better in an SPT dispensation, where the intent is to create a level playing field. The socially dispossessed must be literally brought up to the same level of existence that the normal community member would enjoy. This then is the social services approach in an SPT economy. What are your comments and questions on all of this? Next week, we will continue our discussion on a new subject. Before we end, I would like again to let you attendees know that Unsustainable Development is an educational offering devoted to the dissemination of its cause to all of mankind and to those who have the English language as their official language in the first instance, and to all eventually all over the world. We have in fact been sending this course all over the English speaking world with very favorable responses. To continue to make this possible, and because we do not charge a fee for this dissemination, we rely wholeheartedly on monetary donations to meet the cost of achieving these goals. If you have found these sessions useful thus far and would like others to have access to them, we would gratefully accept your donations should you be inclined to offer them. You can send donations to our PayPal account at the email address notebroker2001@yahoo.com. Thank you for your kind gesture. As indicated before, you can communicate with us by going to our Facebook page on Sustainable Development or our YouTube channel, Balancing the Economy. We will respond to all your comments and questions. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the alert button to get notices that our latest session has been posted. All sessions are archived at our Facebook page. Please share with your family, friends, and acquaintances.